everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today I'm very excited as we're doing a new top 10 here on the channel. Thanks to you guys for throwing this idea out in the Rolling Solo Facebook group. If you haven't checked that out, definitely recommend you do. Lots of chatter about solo games there. And if you're also not a fan of Facebook or aren't on Facebook, you can come to the Discord channel where we have conversations happening there too. So you can be in either spot or you can be in both spots. We'd love to have you in both if it's possible. There's conversations that are happening of different areas of solo gaming and different aspects in both places. So the links for that are in the pinned comment video description. But getting to this video, top 10 survival solo games. So this idea came from those groups. It's an awesome one because I am a huge fan of survival games. And so this really gets me excited because this list was fun to put together. And I want to talk about the criteria I used to put this list together because I could have done this at a very generic level. And when I say generic, I mean just encompassing games where you're playing as a single individual or you're playing as a group and you're basically have a death condition or a loss condition around death. So in other words, that one individual dies or the group dies, you lose the game. That's considered survival. That's probably the most generic level that I could put games into this list using. I didn't want to go that generic because if I did that, I think a ton of games that are right back here as well as games that are not even in the shot. I mean, that would be a huge pile of games to go through for that. So I wanted to fine tune it a bit more to make it more true to what the essence of survival games in terms of that definition are known by. And this includes kind of what you think of if you're thinking about a video game too. And that is 4 criteria that I think really kind of nail it down. And that's going to be the environment being against you, Mother Nature being the first criteria. So in other words, the environment you're going into is not friendly to you. It's going to have things that are going to impact you negatively or things you're going to have to mitigate as you go through it. So Mother Nature or the environment itself being an issue. That's the first criteria. The second one is resource gathering. So having to find resources in order to survive, very important. And as part of that, resource management, of course, because gathering resources, you need to manage them. It's just kind of hand in hand. That's the second one. The third one is crafting. So obviously, if you have resources and you're managing those resources, you now are going to start crafting things. And you're doing this with the purpose of trying to survive, whether it's to build tools or whatever it is, weapons to try to survive. And of course, with that goes, building upgrades. Let's say, for instance, you have a shelter or you have something along those lines that needs to be built up or upgraded over time. We'll go with that. So that's that. The next thing is shelter. You require shelter. So basically, you need shelter in order to stay safe, and you also need to take care of that shelter or at least have a plan around it in order to kind of survive. So those are the criteria that I'm using to kind of pull together a survival game in terms of what could fall into this list. So we're going to go through 10 games right now, and I will say that one of them is not released yet. So that's a bit interesting. Usually I wouldn't do that, but I really think that one of them that hasn't come out yet but will be coming out in the future absolutely is going to be one that's going to rise up my list over time. So for now, I put it in the 10th position. The rest of them have been released, so you're going to see games here that have been out in the wild, but I'm excited to go through this. So without further ado, let's dive into number 10. Number 10 on my list is Stone Saga, and if you haven't checked this one out, definitely recommend you do. Now, I do have a video on the channel which goes over this one from a prototype standpoint, so I'll give you a great idea as to how it flows and operates. But this one definitely ticks all the boxes of a survival board game. You're going to have tons of crafting in here. You got a persistent, unique world going on, as it mentions up top. And as you can see here, you're going to have all that narrative built in here. And it really goes through each of these headers, really just kind of nails off exactly what I was talking about in my criteria. You got crafting and building, exploration, discovery, like all these things are here. And in this one, I had a ton of fun because I found that the actual mechanisms within the game were so unique and interesting in terms of how they were designed. And they really tied into that survival feeling. Like you can see foraging here, you're drawing from a deck, you're looking at what's going on in the cards, you're trying to figure out what you can potentially, do with the cards that you're coming off the deck. And as long as things are going well, you can kind of continue and gather more. If things go sideways, things change. You've got all kinds of just really gritty survival things going on here. One of the by far the coolest thing of this game was just how it uses tokens for specific resources, and then as they kind of evolve over time and you're crafting your way up through the levels and kind of merging things together, the way that they use the tokens to actually flip them over and use symbols on them or icons on them to depict, the next version of them, like that was some of the coolest stuff I found in that game, was that how they used as little tokens as possible to do as much with them. I thought that was really unique and interesting. Again, if you want to see specifics on what I'm talking about, because at a high level that can be really confusing, I've got that video will definitely give you everything you need. But it also just looks really cool on the tabletop as well as a prototype. I was pretty impressed by it. It had these trays to keep all the tiles inside of. Like, it definitely nailed that survival feeling. So I think when this one does come out in the future, this one's going to shoot way up the list for people that are looking for a survival game. At number 9, we have a game which is released into the wild. This is Posthuman Saga, and this one is a re-implementation of a previous version, and the most recent version is the one you're going to want to go after. And this game also has a really, really good expansion, which you're going to want to pick up as well. This one here, Posthuman Saga: The Journey Home. You're going to want to get this. This is ranked very highly. It really kind of bolsters the scoring or alternate scoring paths you can have inside the game. It also kind of layers even more content into the experience. But if you're not familiar with this one, as you might expect from the picture here, you're surviving in a post-apocalyptic world and managing resources and outlasting enemies as you do it. And the game on the table is definitely a sight to see. Like, if you take a look at it here, you've got your fortress in the center here. You've got tiles that depict the different areas you're going to go off and explore in. I mean, if you're looking for a post-apocalyptic game that has solid combat, I want to say that the combat in this one does not get as much credit as it probably deserves. It's very well designed. Now, I didn't do any videos on this one on the channel as of yet. It's something I'd love to do in the future, but haven't had the chance to yet. I might have done an unboxing at one point in time, but I cannot remember. But this is one that I would definitely recommend you check out because, as I said before, it kind of slides under the radar. You might even be able to find it secondhand quite easily, and it is still available, I believe, from the publisher's website as well. They have all the items, I think, in stock. So if you're really gung-ho about it, you really like what it offers, and you can just go ahead and pick it up that way. But I think that this one is kind of a gem. Essentially, it's a hidden gem. It's not ranked very high, like as you can see on Board Game Geek. Like, it doesn't have a super high rating, but I think once you actually implement the rest of the content from the most recent campaign that came out, the game bolsters way beyond a 7. Like, I think, in my opinion, this is cresting up towards an 8, probably around the 7.8 to 8 range. That's where it belongs when you have the whole experience kind of, bundled together. And that, to me, is a very good to great game. So this is one I would definitely put on your radar if you're digging in, trying to find one that has a post-apocalyptic kind of twist to it. There's lots of those out there, so you have tons of choice in that realm, but this is one you should keep an eye on. Number 8 of my survival solo games belongs to Outlive. Definitely well deserved. You're going to notice here that on Board Game Geek, it mentions it as 2 to 4 players. This is easily missed as a solo playable game, which it is. So what this one is really pointing towards is the retail version of the game. The retail core box is a square box, and yes, it's only 2 to 4 players, so that is definitely worth mentioning. An expansion came out when it went to retail, and that was called Underwater, and as you can see, rated quite highly, and it also included the solo mode at that point in time. Now, this was well after all that. The retail box for the core and this expansion was well after a successful Kickstarter campaign where you actually could get a bigger box for Outlive during the Kickstarter that already had all this content inside of it. So think this War of Mine in terms of having all those expansions and pieces all added in. Then later on in retail, they kind of broke things out into boxes and sold them as they typically do. You'll see next to the Too Many Bones product there on the shelf, the book, there's an Outlive box that's vertical, very thin. That thing is very long and thin. It basically goes all the way to the back of my Kallax. That's the one you're going to want to try to find, but the disclaimer with it is that it's going to be tough because there was only so many of them made during the Kickstarter of that version. And then if you want to try to find the one that's the retail based ones, I believe they're sold out at the publisher's site, and I don't think there's a reprint coming. So the only time you're going to find these is on secondary markets, and it's going to become tougher and tougher to find it because most people aren't going to let it go. So just a heads up on that. This one is a gem, though. It's very cool. I'll show you some pictures because I've yammered on about how hard it might be to find it. This is the only one, by the way, on the list besides the crowdfunding Stone Saga mention that will be tough for you to track down. The rest of them are going to be out there. So I didn't want to put too many of these on the list, but I want to mention this one because it's so good. So anyway, you have this whole map here laid out. You got different areas, and you're going to be using worker placement to move between these different areas. You're going to be gathering resources, doing events, all that good stuff. And of course, just all the typical post-apocalyptic, nightmare situations you're going to have to deal with. But I think the thing that's really cool about this one is the actual board. There's the big box, by the way, of what the big box looks like from the Kickstarter edition when it's actually sitting out. So you can see an idea of what it looks like. The retail one's about half that size. If we go in here, I will show you what the actual board, the player boards look like. because it looks very much and is reminiscent of like Fallout Shelter in terms of like building that game, in terms of building out all the different rooms as you'd like to kind of focus on specific activities or needs, and you're gathering resources, dropping them in different areas, and you get your shelter phase and you're managing all that. So you're not only going out into the wild to accomplish goals and try to keep yourself alive and deal with all the craziness in the wastelands, but you're also coming back to your shelter and making sure you're managing that. So this one's a really cool when it comes down to a solo playable game. It's a lot of fun. So I haven't covered this one on the channel yet, and one of my key reasons for not doing so is because of how hard it is to find the game. So I don't really want to show you a playthrough of something, have a bunch of people really enjoy it, and then have an absolutely nasty time trying to actually acquire it. But I wanted to give you guys the focus on this one, because if you can find it, I definitely recommend you snatch it up. Number 7 on my survival solo game list belongs to Unsettled. So we're heading up into the stars in this case. This is a cooperative survival game in a bizarre and wondrous reaches of deep space. And the really unique thing about Unsettled is the fact that it does not focus on heavy combat. A lot of survival games always have that combat angle, and it's almost a real focal point to be like, well, I gotta hold back the elements, I need to take out the enemy, and that's how I survive. This one comes at it from more of an exploratory, dealing with the environment essentially, which just hits that criteria I talked about before, where you have to, the environment is basically encroaching on you, you're exploring it, you're going through it, you're finding things, you're kind of puzzling your way through the experience. And that's what this one really brings to the table, a completely different way of kind of exploring and surviving. And this is a gem. So this one not only was very successful in its first crowdfunding campaign, but it also came back later on, and it added even more worlds. So every world comes in its own separate small expansion box. So you can kind of just pull that box out. It has a wonderful storage system throughout the entire thing, where you can easily get all the pieces that you need to the table. But you can see it's just got a lot of really cool, abstract gameplay going on inside of it. I think that's one of the reasons I was so pulled to it, was how unique it was on the table and how unique it was to play in general. I still love this one. I'm picking up everything for it in the new, most recent crowdfunding campaign in terms of the new content, because I already have the older stuff. It's actually off camera here on the furthest side next to another one, but another one that's actually on this list that I'm not going to mention. Yeah, this is a solid one. So definitely recommend you check it out. Very cool, very well produced. And this one will hit my table multiple times. This is kind of the break. This is what I was mentioning before in terms of how the package, the actual boxes. You got like each planet inside of its own small box. You get the larger one here that encompasses a number from the core. And then when you open them up, you've got these just awesome trays inside that keep everything all nicely organized for when you need to actually visit that particular planet. So this one should, if you've never heard of this one, you need to look into Unsettled. Number 6 on my survival solo game list, with all the criteria met as the ones previous, Sleeping Gods. This one for sure has tons to explore. I mean, the books have a ton of maps to check out. And the difference with this one in terms of the criteria I mentioned way back at the beginning of the video, when I mentioned the word shelter and said it was kind of broad, I meant it really in relation to games like this, where the shelter in this case is a ship versus it being something on land that you'd maybe have like a crafting hut or building or something like that. So in this case, you have your ship and you're managing that ship, you're managing the crew, the resources, you're keeping them healthy, you're crafting. Like there's so much stuff inside this game. It's ridiculous. Now, I think the only downside to this one is just how much table space it takes up. So you're going to want to have a decent sized table. I would say probably a little bit bigger than this. You can see things start to get quite cluttered. If you're playing solo, you're controlling everything. So there's a lot to manage. But I think the experience that this game actually provides for you is amazing. And so this, you can see this is a pretty good setup actually. You can see here that like everything kind of fits if you get it all kind of situated correctly. But one thing I really do like is a coil bound book that allows you to move your ship around these locations, and then you just simply pull the page over and turn it in order to move to the next thing. Done. There's also expansions to even further bolster the content of this one. I mean, this is not a game that people aren't familiar with. They know this thing exists. It's well known in the community. But if you're looking for something that has survival at the heart of the equation, this one definitely does. And it's going to fall into a campaign style of game for this one for sure. So you've also got the story tie-in. If you know anything about Ryan Lockett and his games that he's done in the past, he's always got that narrative, illustration, game design. Like he's got everything kind of tied in. His wife's also involved in that equation as well. But the two of them, and I don't know if there's anyone outside of that equation or not, but that's pretty much the team. That's literally it. So they build these massive games really for such a small amount of people working on them, and they're very impressive, and they seem to get better as time goes on. We've now reached top 5 territory for my survival solo game list. In the 5th position is Kingdom Death Monster. I don't know what survival list would not have this game on it, because this is the epitome of survival. I mean, not only does it check all 4 of the boxes I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but it also just has this aura of, dread that just constantly follows you around. You're always on the back burner trying to survive in this one. So a great addition to the list, and one that should just be a staple on every list anyway. But the other thing I want to mention on this being at number 5 is the fact I have another giant campaign style game here that sits at this position. I didn't want to take up 2 slots on the list with the same types of games, but Aeon Trespass Odyssey is the other one. Now, I'd say if you were going to sit there and say which one is the closest to a true survival experience, I would say Kingdom Death Monster. But this one, Aeon Trespass Odyssey, also does check all 4 of the criteria I mentioned prior, but it doesn't have the same kind of aura around it that Kingdom Death does in terms of survival. It's still, you still have to survive. There's still dangers. You're still going to, deal with numbers in terms of trying to keep a certain number of individuals alive in order to avoid a campaign failure. But it just doesn't have the same darkness level that Kingdom Death Monster throws at you. And the feeling that the second you open the game box, it just wants to kill you instantly. It's kind of like the Dark Souls of campaign games. So basically, that is the number 5th position for me, 100%. And the reason it's down at number 5 for me personally is just because for me, as an individual who also creates content, getting this one out to the table is a little bit tougher. When I do, it stays on the table for long periods of time, but then I put it away and I don't touch it for a bit. So it's one of those ones that you're going to have to weigh that decision on yourself as to whether this campaign game is right for you. Same thing with Aeon Trespass Odyssey. You'll have to weigh whether you want both of these, whether you want one of these, or maybe you want none of them. That's kind of the fun in all this. But the game is very good looking on the table. Of course, there's some things here that do not come with the game. Those are some incredibly designed Etsy-based creations that are making that setup, and people have gone ahead and painted the miniatures. They look incredible, but I wanted to put both these campaign games and lump them into one slot on the list. And I've talked about Kingdom Death a number of times on the channel, so a good solid recommendation here. Number 4 on my survival solo game list is Robinson Crusoe Adventures on the Cursed Island. If there's anybody requesting survival games out on any Facebook group, Discord, anything like that, and I don't see Robinson Crusoe within the first couple entries, I am going to fire it in there almost right away. This thing has been around in the solo community for quite some time and will throw everything at you under the sun. It hits all the criteria that I mentioned before. It is a great solo game, and on top of the fact that AR also is bolstering the game beyond what it was originally, is taking a lot of all the content that came originally and all the expansions, and it's adding on top of that and even boosting the production to the next level in the future. So this thing is going to go through a whole facelift, which is already in the midst of happening, and will be coming out in the near future. But even the game as it is right now, this edition, it's fantastic. This is one that's going to hit all of the well, exactly what you expect. If you're familiar with Robinson Crusoe in general, you're going to know exactly what this thing entails, but it has everything here. You're shipwreck survivor, you're building up your shelter, you're trying to find food, you're trying to fight things, you're trying to protect yourself from the environment. Like, it is awesome, but it's also very challenging. So you have that fun balance of like finding scenarios which are doable when you're first learning the game, and you have other ones that are extremely complex and very difficult to win. And then as you continue to play the game more and more and more, you start learning little tricks that you can use to your advantage in order to try to give you a leg up. And I think that's the design of this one. It just lends itself so well to the more hours you put into it, the more time you put into it, the better you get at playing it. So this is definitely one I would recommend that you check out if you haven't already. We've now made it to the top 3 for survival solo games easily. Frostpunk, the board game, sits at number 3. I mean, I could even argue that this might sit higher, but this is a solid survival game. I mean, they knocked this thing out of the park. I mean, the game as it is as a video game is great, but the fact that they were able to translate what happens in the video game to the tabletop and have all of the complexities that they have involved in this design is a testament to an IP that's coming from a video game moving over to a board game and being done correctly. This thing nailed it, and it is definitely best played at one player. You're going to have every aspect of what I mentioned for criteria at the beginning being a part of the equation. It even mentions it here in this description right off the top. You're going to be dealing with managing the infrastructure, your citizens. You're going to be managing social issues. You've got resources to deal with and gather. You'll be crafting things. You'll be building buildings. Like, everything is here. And if you want to take a look at the pictures for this one, I'll show you a couple examples of what it looks like. Maybe I'll show you one that's actually table versus something from there. this is what it looks like when it's on the table. So you got this huge generator in the middle, and you're throwing coal into it to try to keep it firing, and you're going to be trying to heat up as much around the generator as possible. You've got resources you can go gather. Each scenario is going to throw different challenges at you. You're going to have to try to get around. There's expeditions you can go on. Like this is like very much like Kingdom Death Monster. If there's certain ones that you would say are kind of like the top tier survival games, this one lands up there, which again, this is kind of what my list is based on, is these games that I think are truly a survival experience. If you're looking for that, do not miss out on Frostpunk the board game. This is an absolute gem of a game. Number 2 belongs to This War of Mine, the board game. And honestly, when we get into this top 3 territory, I could interchangeably switch games from any of these top 3. So this one could be my number 1 on a given day. Frostpunk could be my number 1 on a given day. And I'll tell you what my top 1 is in a second. But you guys were probably thinking that this was going to be my top 1. So a little bit of a curveball for you guys. But This War of Mine, the board game, as you guys know, this is a huge one for me. I love this game. It is just a masterpiece of a game design, and also just hits home with all kinds of lessons learned about life in general and the atrocities of war and how it can affect a number of people that aren't even directly involved in it, and how bad that can be, those ripple effects as they go through. This game is going to have you surviving. I mean, there's no other way to say it. You've got yourself boarded up in a terribly rundown house. You can use multiple sides of the game board to get yourself different layouts and things like that, but you're going to be managing everything from resources, and not only are you going to gather resources, you're going to have to deal with people stealing those resources. You'll be crafting things, building things, maintaining a shelter. Like, this is, again, one of those ones that checks all the boxes and more. It has the dread, very much like Kingdom Death Monster. So I really feel like from, 5 all the way up to 1 on this list are going to be the ones that I think are the epitome of a survival game in the board game space. And this one definitely deserves to be on the list. So if you have never checked out This War of Mine, all of the content for it is available retail, and they're also available across multiple expansions. So even if you missed out on the original Kickstarter, you can go back through and get pretty much everything you want, which is pretty awesome. My number 1 survival solo game is The Seventh Continent, and in my opinion, this one is an insane game in terms of its complexity of cards and how they managed to get all this tied together. As you play through this one, as it states here, it goes from 5 to 1,000 minutes, and you can really get lost in this world. The game comes in tons of cards, so again, in terms of managing the components, quite a bit less, I want to say, in terms of what you have to deal with a typical board game. But then in terms of actually playing the game on the table, it does take up a ton of space. So as you start to play this game out, I mean, the nice thing is you do have some really nice storage containers and everything's kind of numbered, but you're going to literally be walking around not knowing what the heck you're going to run into. You're going to be able to interact with different points of interest. You're going to be crafting stuff. And what's truly cool about this game is that different people can play the same curse. You come into this game cursed. You're trying to rid your curse in order to win. You're also trying to explore the environment too. But what's really cool is I can come in and play this game. Someone else can come play this game. We're playing the same curse, but our stories of what happens as we go through the game world and what we're able to craft, what we're able to build, how we manage certain things, how we mitigated certain things during the survival is what makes this game so special, is that it's very, very different every single time. The curse will remain in terms of, your curse and what you're trying to accomplish that way, but the actual, if you have the A and you have the Z, it's all the letters in between that are different as you go through that adventure, and that makes this game just really, really special. So I'm going to try to find some better pictures here, because so far these have been not so great, but you've got a couple here where things are starting out. And of course it does have some miniatures too, but the nice thing is it's not like a ton. It's very small. You could probably paint them up in your spare time very quickly for the ones you actually need. And in most cases, you really just need your own character, and you have a little campfire to denote shelter. So that was the other thing too. When I'm talking about criteria, you might sit there and go, wait a minute, with Seventh Continent, you don't have like an actual shelter. Well, you do have to make camp, and you do have to rest, and you do have to recover. So that, to me, in Seventh Continent is the shelter aspect of taking care of yourself and stuff like that. It already has the resources, it already has the crafting, and it already has the environment throwing everything it can at you to try to take you out. So this one, to me, is the best representation of a survival game you're going to get. And for the most part, it's going to hit on most aspects that people are looking for. But if you want something, I want to see more grim, more dire, more gritty, then that's where Frostpunk the board game, This War of Mine, and Kingdom Death Monster, those types of games are going to fill that aspect for. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up the top 10 survival solo games, at least my top 10. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. Let me know your top 10, top 5, top 3, or maybe just top 1, whatever it is. Let me know. The individuals that are watching this video would love to have a point of reference, not only for my list, but also others, and that will help them gauge which games they should be digging into. If you think there was a game that I missed in the list that should have been in there, let me know. I would love to know. I have blind spots in terms of what I've played and not played, so there might be something out there that should have been on my list. Maybe something I should give a shot and might rise up the list in the future if we redo this one. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought overall, and as always, keep on rolling solo.